Live. Okay, it looks like we are live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever is joining us from wherever you are in the world. I know that we come from many, many different time zones in our large, vibrant, growing global community. So thank you so much for being here and just welcoming Prof. Tim Noakes. So lovely to have you here with us today, and always such a pleasure and a delight to be able to hear your stories and talk to you. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Jane. Lovely to be here and to enjoy the moment and
Yes.
to enjoy what the Nutrition Network's achieved and the Noakes Foundation has achieved over the years. Thanks to your work, your hard work behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, but thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much. And it does feel like it feels like a celebration. This is a special live session. Today we're celebrating, obviously, the fact that it was your birthday yesterday. And then a number of it feels like this whole year has been a series of celebrations, big events, things to be excited about. So obviously it's been sort of the Noakes Foundation's 10-year anniversary last year, my 10-year anniversary within the group this year. Then it was, of course, the Nutrition Network is 8, so we're a bit younger than the Noakes Foundation. So I thought it might be a good place to start, is to look back and to just talk a little bit, if you're happy to share just the journey of where this all began. You know, how you stumbled into the low-carb community and then how these things evolved.
So I stumbled in one Sunday morning and I just returned from a run and I opened my emails and there was an advert for a book called The New Atkins for the New You, written by 3 guys whom I knew quite well. And as a promoter of the high carb diet, I knew Atkins was a disaster. He was promoting this high fat diet and he was killing the world by promoting saturated fat intakes. So I was really irritated. So I went down to the local bookshop and purchased the last copy of the book and brought it home and started reading half an hour later or so. And after about 3 hours reading, I realized that I'd been wrong for 33 years and it might be time to change. So I decided, well, I better start then. So at lunchtime, I decided that was the end of the carbs for the time being. And I started on the low carb diet with the typical South African high meat diet. So I really enjoyed it. It was what I was raised on before I discovered that you had to eat high carb diets if you want to be an athlete. So I started, and within a day or two, I felt remarkably better. And it's clear I had type 2 diabetes. I probably had a high glucose at the time. And so my glucose came rocketing down, I suspect. And so I started to feel better. And that was the beginning. And from that moment, I haven't changed since then because I've really benefited hugely from it. Obviously, I think everyone understands that.
Amazing, Prof. Thank you so much. So for those of you that are joining, of course, those of you that are part of the Nutrition Network know the story, know the history, know how we got here. But it feels so important to just touch on it because of what a beautiful story and journey it is. And I think we've lost our ability to tell stories sometimes because we get so stuck in the science. So tell us a little bit about how, but what came before the Nutrition Network, long before, of course, or a couple of years before, was the Noakes Foundation. And that was where it all began. And it's kind of, you started with this big sensation, which was the real meal revolution. So I'm interested in the journey of how we got from there to training doctors and specialists around the world.
So what happened next was that I started reading all about these different diets and the low carb diet. There wasn't too much written in those days. I remember I was overseas and there was a little bookshop and there was a low carb diet for runners. There were very few books about it. It really was extremely novel in those days. And so the next thing that happened was I was on Twitter, and I think the next thing I went onto Twitter actually. And so I obviously started promoting the low carb diet. And then I came across another lady, Sally Ann Creed, and I realized she was also a low carb nutritionist. And I think then I probably referenced her once or twice. And then she contacted me and she said we had to meet because we'd really like to write a book on the low carb diet for athletes. And that was John O'Proudfoot was the driver behind that. And so we decided we would write the book, and nothing happened. For a year, nothing happened. And then about the next year, as I recall, suddenly we realized we had 3 weeks. If we wanted to get the book done by December, we had 3 weeks to write this book. And fortunately, by then, I'd written quite a lot of the whole story of the evolving story of the low carb diet. So it didn't take me long. And in fact, we had 3 weeks, and within 3 weeks, we produced this book, which was astonishing. And we then phoned up the publishers who we thought would be interested. And by chance, we found someone there who was temporarily employed. And they said they had no interest in the book. And
Oh, wow.
ultimately, they were very unhappy about that. So anyway, we did find a publisher in Cape Town. And we put the book together by Christmas, and then it just went mad. And the end result was that the royalties, or quite a lot of royalties coming, and then we decided to put that into a trust, which would then become the Noakes Foundation. And John O'Proudfoot said, well, you need someone to run it. So then we advertised, and I think we had 3 people respond, and you were one of them. And that was how we met you. And so we appointed you, and we haven't looked back since. So that was how that started. Sure. And the next thing was that as the Noakes Foundation grew, you came up with the idea of the Nutrition Network. And as I recall, we filmed something. We filmed a conference that we put on, or I can't quite remember. And then you said, well, let's put it on the internet, which we did. And then that was the start of the Nutrition Network.
Gosh, it's so, for those of you, thank you so much, Prof. For those of you joining, hi, Kieran. I hope I pronounced that correctly, from Ireland. Denise, hello. Thank you so much for sharing. Let us know where you're dialing in from. And I hadn't actually, that's a part of the story that I'd never heard, that the book was actually declined. Those publishers must have regretted it. Amazing. Wow. So there's always a new part to the story that when one listens in different at different times, that it keeps evolving. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So for those of you that haven't heard it and that have many times, you'll hear with me for the first time that the book, The Real Miracle Evolution, was declined. And then here we got, of course, to that point that you're talking about now, Prof, which was, there's Hasina. Hi, Hasina, our medical director, Dr. Kaji. What a beautiful story. I'm so glad that you get to experience the domino effect of the change that you live. Beautiful. So for those of you that are dropping a line, let us know where you're listening from. Prof, okay, so that led us to 2018. So this was a couple of years. And of course, a big thing happened in that time, which was your HPCSA journey. That also Cynthia from Canada, hi, thanks for saying hi, that brought us to this point, which was, of course, a big aspect as well of how the Nutrition Network began, was what you went through over those years of questioning and challenging the science. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that informed your, I guess I almost want to call it your passion for, you've always had a passion for challenging and questioning the science, but that definitely deepened your journey with this inquiry and this relationship that you've had with science and what it means and what's behind it.
So as I recall, what happened next was that Lewis Pugh, who we'd gone to the North Pole with and helped him swim in the cold water, he said, no, you must get onto Twitter because that's the way to get your message out. And I think that was 2012, April 2012. So I started very cautiously and really didn't know what the rules were or if rules were being made up because it was something quite new. So I remember in December 2013, I was invited to give a lecture in Johannesburg for sort of young South Africans or whatever. And when I was there, I subsequently learned that there were 6 dietitians, each who'd brought their tape recorder along. So I only learned this later. So clearly there was something brewing. And the last question, I still remember, it was something about breastfeeding babies. And I thought, but I didn't speak about babies. Well, what's this got to do with it? I was talking about adult nutrition. So anyway, I didn't think more of it. And then I got a request on Twitter. A lady asked, uh, was it safe for her to eat a high-fat diet? Sorry, she didn't say her. That was the key point. She said for mothers in the plural and babies. And so I answered it with 7 words. And the next thing I knew, I was getting a letter from the Health Professions Council telling me that I was spreading misinformation, et cetera, et cetera. So what had happened was the head of the Dietetics Association had reported me within about 12 hours of that tweet. She'd reported me, and she started getting support from her profession and making sure that she was right in with the Health Professions Council, that they would then charge me. So which they did. And initially I thought, but this is a joke. I mean, how can you honestly take this seriously, that a 7-word tweet should lead to anything of importance? So I completely ignored it. And then I think I had 3 months to respond. And then all of a sudden I had a week left to respond. So then I suddenly realized I better do something. And of course the error, I should have gone to the lawyers and said, please help me with this, because that's what they warned you, said you better get a lawyer to help you, which I didn't do, because we didn't have a lawyer at that time. And then I didn't as a personal lawyer, but fortunately we had Adam Park, who's helping us with the Noakes Foundation. And so it must have been early days, but he was definitely, I'm trying to think, was the Noakes Foundation already formed by then? But maybe it was. But anyway, I contacted him, and then he helped drive the trial for me. So eventually I responded, and then they had a committee of 7, which had to decide, and they couldn't decide whether or not I should be charged. And instead of calling me in and saying, defend yourself, do you think, what are you thinking? Why did you do this? And what's your defense? They consulted with people who didn't like me, who then decided to attack me in the media. And so there was this vicious attack in the media because I had spoken to Parliament, at the South African Parliament. And I remember what happened. I was going to show slides, and the slides went down, so I couldn't show slides. I had to talk off the cuff. And I didn't mention the book once. Not once did I mention the book. But unfortunately, the next Monday, on the front page of the local newspaper, there was my picture handing a book, The Real Meal Revolution, to the speaker, the deputy speaker of the House. And that then sparked my university. And they said, here he is selling this diet to the Parliament, i.e. to the people of South Africa. And this now is misinformation. So they wrote this dreadful letter to the local newspaper. They didn't warn me about it. They just appeared. They did send it to me on the Friday afternoon, and the article was published on the Monday. So that information was then used by the HPCSA as clear evidence that the University of Cape Town thought I should be charged. And so then we went to the charge, and then we went through the 4-year trial, which you know all about, and that was 20 days in court. But the turning points for me was at that very time in 2014, Nina Taishar published her book, The Big Fat Surprise. And that was just amazing, because here was this book, and that was all the evidence I was looking for to say that there's no evidence that a high-fat diet causes heart disease. So that was one of the crucial points. But obviously the support we got in the trial was amazing. And in the end, it turned out to be very good for the cause.
Thank you so much, Prof. I mean, Cynthia just said that she's reading Real Food on Trial at the moment, and she cannot believe how just what a story it is, And I think I can speak for everyone that's listening, and everyone certainly that's been involved and that's known the story, is just to thank you for your courage, because of course we went from a place where there was very little science available to, over those years, this position where the science was almost settled. And I think, Prof, I mean, what's so interesting about you is throughout your career, you've challenged conventional thinking and you've looked at science and uncovered inconvenient truths. And of course, you've become a figurehead and a trailblazer for so many others, particularly in medicine. And that's what I'd love to talk, or you to share a little bit about now, is really, how obviously this translated into what is now the Nutrition Network. And it supported us with the confidence to start to train doctors and healthcare professionals, and then later on coaches. But ultimately, throughout your career, you've always challenged the kind of dominant consensus or dominant thinking in healthcare. And, obviously, medicine has been focused very much on treatment rather than prevention, and medication focused in the way that it's administered. Why do you think it's taken so long for the healthcare community to shift towards the more preventative model? And, how can we challenge and replace this go straight to medication and treatment mindset?
Yeah. So it's interesting background here, but, I don't think I was a challenger when I went into medical school. I don't think that I had a conventional matric education, and there was nothing that was unusual, except when I got into medicine, I was absolutely disinterested in medicine. I mean, that's the reality. I was interested in sports medicine. And so everything I learned, and exercise physiology, everything I learned on medicine, I applied to sport. And somehow I managed to graduate at the end of 6 years and convinced the examiners that I knew a little bit about medicine. But the one thing I didn't know was how to treat disease. I had zero interest. I could not learn the drug names. It just would not go into my head. So that was the reluctance I had. And I was much more interested in sports and prevention of problems. And I think the creativity just grew as I decided I didn't want to learn the textbook, because if you want to become a physician, that's what you have to do. You have to go out and learn the textbook. I was much more interested in writing the textbook and on topics that hadn't yet been sort of investigated properly. And so that's what I did. And I was just fortunate that I did my PhD in medicine. That was my MD. And then a job came available where I could start teaching sports science at UCT. And so there was nothing. And I didn't come from a sports science background, so I didn't know what I was meant to know, which is terribly important. And so when I looked at the evidence, and again, I was an athlete at the time, and I thought, but this doesn't make sense. And so then I would look into it and discover what I thought made sense. So I can remember the first thing that I challenged was the idea that you run out of oxygen and that's why you get tired. And that didn't make sense. And when I looked at the evidence, the evidence was very poor. And in fact, ultimately we began to realize that it wasn't the truth. And we started with absolutely nothing. I mean, the first year of our research, we had a scale and a rectal thermometer. And so the only thing we could do was to go to the Comrades Marathon and measure people's body temperatures after they'd run the race and see how much weight they'd lost. And then see if there was some sort of relationship between this. And then fortunately, because I was running the course, we had 10 students and they each had to do a project. And so we started doing research projects. And then just to continue that story, which shows you anecdotes have always been very influential to me. In 1983, so the course had been going for 2 years, and a friend of mine invited me to come and be the doctor investigating a race, a canoeing race off the coast between Port Elizabeth and East London. And so the night before, I remember meeting this guy called Oscar Chalupsky, and he's 18 years old, and he says, guys, I'm going to win this race. You're all competing for second. And this was he was talking to international athletes who he had no right to say that, but he was an exceptional athlete. So anyway, And of course, so he is leading the race. And the last day, as he paddles through the water, the big seas, to get out to go to East London, he loses all his water bottles. And so he has to paddle for 5 hours with any fluids. And when he arrives at the other end, I weigh him and he's lost 5 kilograms. And now the teaching at the time was that if you lose 5 kilograms, you're dead. You're going to have a heat stroke. So, okay, so now I'm expecting to find he's got a very high body temperature, and his body temperature was absolutely normal. It was 37.8, which is absolutely normal. It's meant to be elevated. So the question was, why wasn't it elevated? Because he's paddling in a cold environment. And anyway, then I knew that there's no relationship between water loss and dehydration. So that became one of our early things that we looked at. And we studied that, and then we found that it's the rate at which you burn energy that determines your body temperature during exercise. It's got nothing to do with how much water you've lost. That would ultimately lead to this whole research into overhydration, because the industry starts, the sports drink industry starts just as we're getting the evidence that water is not important. And they over promote the drinking, and then that causes this condition of water intoxication. And then we describe the first case in the world that we happen to see the lady, and she reports what happened. And it's a prepared mind, so that I could immediately see that what was happening. So that led us down that route, and there were lots of others to come even before the Damascene moment with the diet.
Gosh, Prof, it feels like you've been on this incredible journey of curiosity and questioning and kind of visual intelligence. And it seems like almost your interest in sport is what led you on the health path instead of the disease path throughout a large chunk of your career.
Yeah. No, that's very
So talk to us about that moment when you came into the nutrition space, because obviously that was quite late in your career. It's actually almost at the end of your formal career.
No,
that
that's
you
correct.
stepped into the space that's now opened up a whole new Pandora's box, a new career.
That's right. Well, I think my father died from type 2 diabetes, so I had some interest, but I mean, I just presumed that I'd be fine because I'm running marathons and I'm eating this healthy diet, so nothing could happen to me. And then, as I mentioned, that I read the book and the Atkins, the new Atkins for the new you, and then I read it, and there clearly was evidence there that I did not know about. And I thought, but yeah, you're the expert on sports nutrition. You've written this big book, Law of Running, and it describes what you're meant to eat when you're running marathons and so on. But you've never read this stuff about the low carb movement. And so that really made me realize that there was a big gap. And I realized what had happened. There was complete suppression, absolute suppression of that information. And one of the leaders who wrote that book was Jeff Volek. And I became very friendly with Jeff over the years. And he told me that every year he would apply to the National Institute of Health in America for funding to study low carb diets. And every year it would get rejected without being read, because if you mentioned low carbs, they were not interested. So they got thrown out. So that's how I started. And then I think the funny moment, well, it's not a funny moment, but in retrospect, I wrote an article because I was the spokesperson for nutrition for Discovery Health, the health insurer. And they had promoted me and I'd promoted them with this low-fat, high-carb diet. And I must just, in retrospect, say that they helped my career enormously. I mean, it wouldn't have taken off. They funded myself and Mornay Duplessis when we founded the Sports Science Institute. And it was that funding which allowed us to do all the research that we did. And a lot of the research was also funded by the sports drink industry. And we were going to find that carbs were very helpful, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the research was focused on. But anyway, because of my own health issues, and then I changed my diet and started to feel better, I was writing I think a monthly or a quarterly article for Discovery for their magazine. So I wrote this article, Beyond the Grains. And that was it. I was never asked to write another article
That was
for
the
that.
last one.
That was the last one, because I said, I've moved beyond grains and this is the reason why. And I gave and I wouldn't change one word in that article, even though I know a lot more now. It was correct and appropriate. But for some reason, Discovery didn't want to promote a non-grain based diet. And I still to this day do not know why. I've not been able to answer it, because over the years, obviously, I only lost their funding and we still remained friends. And so many of their senior people were on the diet, the low carb diet, and running marathons on low carb diets, and they wouldn't really acknowledge it for whatever reasons. So that was how I moved into nutrition. I must just add one point, that fortunately the trial lasted 4 years, because that gave me time to really learn about health nutrition. Because I knew nothing about what causes heart disease. Well, the science behind cholesterol and so on, I didn't really understand it when the trial began. But because they delayed for 2 years before I had to go and give my evidence, I was able to fill that with 2 years of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And that made a massive difference to what I could understand. And I remember our chief lawyer, Mike van der Nest, who, just remind everyone, he gave his time to me for free, and the cost would have been exorbitant. I couldn't have afforded, absolutely unable to afford his services. And he just said, Tim, I just want you to give facts. Just get up there and speak facts. That's all I want. And he looked at the book, The Real Meal Revolution, and then the children's book, which was even more important. That book hasn't really been recognized as being, it's a great book. It's even better than The Real Meal Revolution, because it's the children's book. And he said, listen, there's all the evidence you need. There it is. Just give them that evidence.
Prof, I think what's so interesting, as you're talking and when you talk about the timelines of all of this, of course, is, do you think that the landscape has changed? And, because a lot of this is about the rejection of the low carbohydrate diets, particularly when, the carbohydrate load of a meal is challenged. And it seems like you've also highlighted something quite important, which is that differentiation between medicine and diet. Yeah. It seems like they're kind of almost seen as two separate pillars, and doctors treat, disease, and dietitians treat people that need a dietary change. And I think most of the time people don't even get to the dietitian. They just go straight into the medication pathway. What has changed over the years? Are we changing the system that we understand so badly needs to change? And what do we still need to do? It feels like this is a longer journey than any of us thought, but also there are big wins. So let's maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah, no question. There's been huge change in the last 10, 12 years. I mean, it's chalk and cheese where we are today compared to where we were, because you now can't, social media is full of it, and you can't read anything without eventually the low carb diet coming out, or nutrition becoming important. So it has to be, there's been a huge change. But I think that what I take the most hope for is what's happening in the United States of America at the moment. And with the change in the president, and he appointing as secretary Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy has said nutrition has to be taught at every single medical school in the United States. And Trump is very strong. If he makes a decision, they're going to enforce that. So I see that as being a huge change. And Kennedy, there was talk about him telling Trump that he must start the carnivore diet. And I think that's certainly gone some of the way, but he is taking on the industry. And and you can't split the food industry from the pharmaceutical industry. They're tied together. And he's taking on both of them. And what I'm hoping will happen is that the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on just everyday advertising will stop, because what you see in the mainstream media is largely what the pharmaceutical industry wants you to see. And they can only do it because they make such exorbitant profits. And once he makes it less easy for them to to make those profits, and where they have to justify and what they're actually doing and prove that the claims that they are making are real, because there's been a complete breakdown in the scientific validity of what they are doing. So I think that if President Trump stays for a period, and if Kennedy has a couple of years, not just these 3 years, but some more years thereafter, there are going to be big changes. And what happens in America will happen around the rest of the world as well. And the thing I like about Robert Kennedy is he's deeply steeped in the science, and he really knows it. He's a lawyer, and he understands how science works. And so that's, if that hadn't happened, I think we would take another 10 or 15 years. But there is a possibility that could be real change within the next 2 or 3 years.
So I guess that leads on to all of our members at the Nutrition Network that are listening to this, that are in the journey of becoming either certified or doing various different specializations that we have within our quite large, I think we've just launched our 56th training. So we've got this a plethora or bouquet of quite elaborate specializations and also general trainings in sort of how to adopt a low carbohydrate principles, the low carbohydrate principles into your practice. And we've obviously we're now almost on 10,000 doctors and coaches and specialists around the world. So what we do have is this incredible group of growing specialists that are expert in the field. And just a shout out to all of you that are listening. Thank you so much for the work, the support that you offer and for being here. Prof, obviously you've talked quite a bit about, you mentioned how Twitter was very new at the beginning of your journey. And I definitely see that the people in our network are quite, not all of them. There are a couple of celebrity, Instagrammers and tweeters and things, but on the most part, I'd say probably over 90% of our members don't come onto social media and don't reveal themselves online. What advice can you give them for those that are kind of hiding and are still afraid of actually talking out and, sharing the science, sharing their journey, sharing what they know to be the correct practice, and dietary advice?
Well, I began on Twitter to follow other people and to learn, and I still do. So I follow some of the leaders. And you get information in a way that is unprecedented. So we get articles or someone's promoting an article that they published months before. I might never, ever hear about it. So that's the way I keep current. It's not what I'm saying, it's what I'm seeing other people are saying. And I think that's very useful. I don't think there's any other better source of staying current. And all you have to do is you have to find people who are interested in the same stuff that you're interested in, and then find the ones who are trusted and follow them. And very soon you'll be getting all this information. I literally write books now, like Law of Running. I'm editing it again. And the lectures I give for Nutrition Network, the updated material is coming from Twitter. That's where I'm keeping current. And it's almost like every day you go to a lecture and someone says, well, I think you should read this or that or the other. It is an amazing source of information. And I know people get anxious that, you're going to get trolled and all that. I think you only get trolled once you start getting close to the truth, but you don't have to put yourself in that position at all. You can just be an observer. So I think that to be an observer is a huge way of keeping current and learning about the latest stuff. So that's why I think Twitter is so good, because it keeps you so current, and it's so interesting because so much happens there that, this week I shared a lovely story. I was watching television the other night, and there's the story of a thing called War Games came out. And it's how a group of WRENs, that's the Women's Auxiliary Naval Service, won the war for Britain. There was 6 of them, And if they hadn't done what they had done, Britain would not have won the war. And who knows about that? Now, I wouldn't have known about that. Now I've been able to order the book and I'll read it. But it was so exciting. And what was interesting was that their boss made one observation. He saw one observation. He said, that's it. That's what the Germans are doing. And we thought they were doing X, and they're actually doing Y. And then they worked out how to counter the Y. And that won the Battle of the Atlantic for Britain. So, I mean, it's just so exciting. I didn't know that last week. And now know. Nothing to do with nutrition, but who knows what you're going to come across.
Prof, so I mean, and so we've trained up around 10,000 people on our many courses, and we're coming towards 100 that have certified as absolute specialists, which, can you believe, when we ran those pilots a couple of years ago with that first group with Peter Cummins and a handful of people that we were testing it on, that we would be in year 5 and that we would have certified 100 people. Yeah. What has your experience been? You're obviously the kind of one of the key lecturers, along with Dr. Hasina Kaji, Neville Wellington, and a number of the rest of our team. What are your kind of what do you think the training's like? Tell us a little bit about the experience of doing it and the value that it might add to someone's practice.
I just astonished at the quality of the students. It is really, it's humbling, not humiliating, it's humbling. It's humbling to be able to share information with these people because they are so enthusiastic. They're like sponges. They just, all the information they take up. And it's one of the best teaching that I've ever had. It's so rewarding to see people learn so much. And then, you just point them in a direction and they've gone and they will find out all they need to know. So we're just attracting the best of the best. That's what it's clear to me. Firstly, to be a low carb person, you have to be totally different to stand alone against the whole discipline. And then to do this course, you're selected again. So that that's what I've noticed. The students are just dramatic, and they're self-learners, and they're self-motivated, and it's just amazing. They're such good students, and of course they come from across the world, which is exciting to see that we all have the same problems. That doesn't matter whether in the US or in the Philippines or in Canada or in South America or in Europe. The problems are the same, that this diet is not promoted. And if you do promote the idea, then you're going to be marginalized to some extent. And so it's been great to give those people a union and a team that they can feel I belong to something. So it's been incredibly rewarding. And here I am retired and I'm still teaching. It's just wonderful.
Thanks, Prof. I think what you've said about community is such an important point, because what we're seeing at the moment in the world within our community is that there's the early adopters, and there's this group that has really understood and incorporated LCHF into their practice. And then there's the majority of medicine that's still resisting it. And still kind of putting, I went to an endocrinology conference. I've told you the story last year, where I felt like I was an imposter. And I thought it would be sort of our home territory by now. But there I was almost kind of sharing information that didn't feel like it was welcome. And I think it's such an interesting time, because how do we encourage non-adopters of the LCHF diet to at least start to consider that this might be a part of their toolkit, not they don't necessarily have to convert.
I had an insight when I was tweeting about the war game story. I realized what the truth is. The truth is that the story, the anecdotes are so important. But who adapts the anecdote? It's the early adapters. And why do they do it? Because they're not scared of being wrong. That's the key. So they say, gosh, this is a nice idea, and I'm going to promote it. It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. I'm going to promote it, and other people can see whether they like it or not. And the non-adapters are the ones who are too scared to be wrong. And they'll wait until this new idea is accepted by the majority. And that's the key. And so you can't change the majority of the sheep majority. I don't know quite what we should call them, but they will not move until they've got license to do it. And the license has to come from the person who's paying their salary. So, almost that's so certainly the way it is in medicine. If your salary is terribly important to you, you're not going to break away from the people who all believe the same thing. But that, I'm convinced of that the early adapters are not scared to be wrong. And the rest are so scared to be wrong that they will only convert when they know everyone agrees with them. And so they can't be wrong.
Sure.
That's how it happens. So how do you do that? How do you change it? You just keep pushing and giving out the information.
It sounds like courage is the word, or bravery required to do it. Yeah, so amazing, Prof. Thank you for sharing that. It feels so important. Cynthia, thanks for what you said there. I saw it flash through the screen about how you do it if you can. Oh, there you go. The NMP pathway is amazing. If anyone's on the fence about it, I say go for it. Thanks, Cynthia. Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for doing it and being brave and courageous. Prof, anything that stands out over the last years in your, I want to say since you retired, when your career really began to some extent, or the career when this journey began? There's been so many parts of the story. It's been such an incredible journey. It just feels like there's so many people, so many stories that have come through it. And of course, one big one, which we haven't mentioned yet, is that in 2014 was the summit that Corin Thompson arranged.
That's right. Yeah.
Was it 2014 or 2015?
2015, yeah.
So actually exactly 10 years ago. So it's taken us 10 years to finally reiterate it and get another African summit. In 2020, we booked and paid for one of the largest conference venues in South Africa in February. I think I paid the deposit. And then we all know what happened in 2020, March. So it's taken us 5 years to actually resume that. And here we are in October. There is this amazing World Nutrition Summit that's going to be in Cape Town. I think it's the 15th to the 18th of October. So that's something just to mention, and to invite any of you that are listening to come and say hi in Cape Town. And I know many of you have just got back from Europe, where I was at some of the keto summits. And of course, everyone just wants to meet Prof. So I said to them, well, you'll have to come to Cape Town in October. Prof, share with us the highlights of that first summit and how different, obviously, this year is going to be, and also what you plan to talk on. I'd love to hear a bit about.
Yeah, so that was an amazing conference because we got so many of the top names at the time, and they all came. It was astonishing. I'm thinking, and we made some careers. Jason Fung came out, and I remember seeing him giving a lecture on Twitter or something, or on YouTube, and I said, we have to have him. And he came and he gave one of the best talks, and that his career started from that. And then he wrote all these 3 wonderful books.
Amazing.
So I remember all of the guys. It was a remarkable conference. And why was it so amazing? Well, because it should never have happened. I mean, the funniest thing was that until 3 weeks before the conference, we didn't know who was going to pay for it. And then Old Mutual eventually came through and paid a couple of million, but I don't know what we were going to do if we didn't get that money. But Corin Thompson said, just got to believe. You're the one who's always telling us to believe, so you should just believe. So I think it was a great conference because it was well organized. The food was brilliant, the speeches were excellent, and everyone just did extremely well. So that was the one. The next thing that happened to me was, again, by chance in 2017, I went to Jeff Volek's conference at Ohio State. And there I met Philip Prince, who was a boy from Rondebosch, old boy. And he'd gone to America on a tennis scholarship, and he'd stayed on as a scientist, and he developed this laboratory. And he said, would I like to work with him on low carb diets? And he said, he asked me, you specifically tell me what we should study. And so that's what I did. Well, I said, well, let's do this. So, it started really simple. And then after 7 years, we had the definitive study. We just, a year ago, we completed the definitive study to show that what you eat before exercise has got no impact whatsoever on your performance, none at all. So the carbohydrate loading is unnecessary. And all you need to do is eat a little carbs during exercise, a trivial amount, and that prevents your blood glucose from falling. So how did we come to these ideas, which are revolutionary, and I'll talk about them. So during this period, I was writing, well, in fact, here's the document that you can see it's quite thick. It's over 100 pages. And we submitted it to a journal called Endocrine Reviews, which is one of the top journals in the world. And they normally only take 50 pages, but they didn't start. They said, this is too good. We have to have it all. And I've kept the review because it's not often you have a decent review. And he says, I found the manuscript to be exceptional in its clarity, depth, and scope. It delivers a meaningful reinterpretation of the role of carbohydrate in endurance performance and calls for a paradigm shift that deserves serious attention from the field. Paradigm shift.
Wow.
And it's just amazing. But it's interesting. I mean, I just worked through the literature, read 600, 700 papers, all studying the same thing, and came to realize that the carbohydrate stores in the body are differently regulated. There are the two pools. And we did the studies that showed it in the 1990s. We showed it, but we couldn't interpret it, and no one else can interpret it. And still, when I read what people say, they don't get it. And because they're differentially regulated, it means what you eat before exercise or during exercise is going to go to totally different pools and have totally different effects. No one recognizes that. So it's been very exciting because that is the paradigm shift. And it really does mean, and one of the people working with is Andy Kutnik, who's a type 1 diabetic, who's a wonderful scientist. And he wrote a paper on himself, his 10-year analysis of his health, and he's in peak of health. Everything's got all the markers that you could look at. And he's in perfect shape because he's eating this very low carb diet, and he is using insulin. He has to because he's type 1 diabetic, but he's not getting sick as a result. So it's great. He's one of the senior help co-authors on the paper.
Prof, I definitely obviously, I've just come back from the Keto Live Summit where Andrew was giving such an amazing lecture. Of course, you were a large chunk of that was talking about your work. And it really made me realize the impact of your work on so many different areas. It's not just about type 2 diabetes and obesity, that this and your influence has reached, and of course as well the nutrition network in the later years. It's really also particularly type 1 diabetics and athletes who just benefit so much from your continuous growing, evolving body of work and are just waiting for whatever you find next. So thank you so much for just continuing to be a source of immense inspiration to so many, I think, and obviously to myself and all of us around the world. And I guess, we're kind of coming to the end of our time now, but I just want to, of course, say to all of you that are listening, you're invited in October. Prof, are you going to be speaking about your new exercise research?
Yeah, definitely, because by then I think the papers will be published, and one will be able to say with certainty, this is the new truth.
Amazing.
And why it's so important, because athletes don't have to eat carbs now anymore. You can just take a little bit during exercise instead of having to stuff yourself before exercise. And always the argument was, oh, but you have to have them to perform. And it's very clear that you don't. I'm also at the moment working on my second debate with Dr. Louise Burke, the Australian, who's who did some studies on a group called the race walkers, and they became, everyone knows these studies, and everyone knows they disprove the low carb diet. They prove that the low carb diet doesn't work. And so despite all the evidence, so I'm very interested to see, because I've put in my first statements. Now she has to respond to those statements, and I'm interesting to see what she said, because the evidence is so overwhelming that you can do anything you like on a high-fat diet. And it's going to be interesting to see how she counters that argument.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm just looking at Daniel's question, which I think is worth just reading out because it's brilliant. Most endurance athletes are still very low carb focused. A lot of my triathlete friends basically carb load every day. Not surprisingly, many of them are pre-diabetic on statins, taking medication, high blood pressure. How far are we from seeing a real change in the way endurance athletes approach nutrition?
Yeah, Daniel, that's a great question, because it's really got bad in the last year or two. And the idea that you must take in lots of carbohydrate during exercise has become a dominant theme. It's exactly what we had with water. You know, you couldn't drink enough water. You must drink as much water as tolerable. Now it's you must eat as much carbohydrate as tolerable during exercise. And I've got into a lot of battles on Twitter. But it is changing, and you're noticing it. But there's a guy called Lionel Sanders who is a world-class Ironman triathlete, world-class. And I think he's won the Ironman, or he's come second, certainly. And he suddenly announced, I've got a sugar addiction, I've got type 2, I'm pre-diabetic, and I have to stop it because I'm killing myself. And he's in his mid-30s. He's the first one to come out. Then I tweeted a few days ago a picture from an article showing the 24-hour continuous glucose monitors in an elite athlete. And I think he's a Tour de France cyclist, because he had a very high capacity for exercise. It was a disaster. His glucose was all over the place. And so I said, this looks to me like he's pre-diabetic. This doesn't look normal. And oh boy, was the kickback. Oh, how can you say it's abnormal? You know, this is blah, blah, blah. How can an athlete be pre-diabetic? How can a Tour de France cyclist be pre-diabetic? Well, if you saw what they ate, it's the worst diets I've ever seen. But because they're performing well, the people get confused and think, well, that's what you need. But you don't. It's interesting that I was helping a South African cyclist. He was on the carnivore diet, eating a high-fat diet. He actually got selected for a professional team in Europe, professional cycling team. And they told him, we're not having anything of that nonsense. So he gets on the team because he's eating a high-fat diet. When he gets on the team, they say, no, you've got to change to a high-carb diet. Yeah, it's a long way to go still. But I think that article is going to make a difference, and the debate I'm having with Louise Burke is going to definitely have an influence, because you can't hide it, and that's also in one of the leading journals, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. So what that means is that the average doctor, the average physician, the average endocrinologist is going to see this debate, and then they're going to see, my gosh, there is an argument for the low carb diet. And the argument for the high carb diet is very, very weak at very best.
Prof, that's such a lovely closing point, which is just to encourage those of you that are listening and that know the science so well to keep talking about the lack of evidence of the high carb diet as a start point. We've got a couple of quick announcements before we close. The one is the Noakes Foundation has got a Sweat for Science challenge this month. It's not too late to join. You have to move every day for a month and sweat. And that's a fundraiser for the foundation, which you can find a lot more information. It's really exciting, sharing all that you're up to on social media. So please join that and sweat with us if you can. I'm joining a few days late because I've recovered from a chest cold, but I'll start tomorrow on the 4th. So I'll have to go on until the 4th of August just to make up for it. We've also got, obviously, we've talked about the World Nutrition Summit. The foundation's offered a 2-day discount of half-price tickets for Prof's birthday and today. There you go. They've popped it up on the screen. So if you know you're coming, or if you're on the fence, today is the day to book your ticket. and looking at flights to Cape Town, which has been voted the #1 city in the world by the Time Out travel ratings. And we know why. So come and join us in spring and see why we live here and why we choose it. It's going to be amazing. Then the Nutrition Network has got gates are open at the moment for the medical certification pathway. So if you're along the process of being ready to fully certify and you want to take that big jump, which Prof talks about earlier, which is our 4-month real face-to-face, very in-depth certification program, you are welcome to send in your application and talk to us. There's also the coach training. So the medical certification starts at the end of August or early September. Coach starts early next year. There's a few places on both still available. And then the last one is that there's also a diagnostics training that's being launched. Very exciting training. We've never actually kind of talked about diagnostics and the importance of them. We're always talking about how, the pharmaceutical industry punts medication onto patients, but we don't talk about the positive aspects that they bring to diabetes and, monitoring, which is around diagnostics. So that's a really in-depth, really exciting training that gives you a lot of detail on how to, work with monitoring tools and to make them, support your health journey with that. So join any of those things, find any of us anywhere through all of our social media channels. Prof, thank you so much for your time. As always, I've learned new things. I just wanted to read a quote, which is on my diary for today, and I only saw it now, and it summarizes you. It says, the real quality of our life is not determined by what we make or take from it, but by what we have discovered within it. And I think that you're just such an example of somebody who just keeps discovering as you go. It's like, I cannot believe all the new science that's coming off that desk as the years go on. And I can't wait to see what comes next. So thank you so, so much for your time today, and blessings.
Thanks for a lovely interview. Thank you, Jane. Thanks so much. And again, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye.